Yes, I believe I am.
Robert House almost seems to be the Tony Stark / Howard Hughes of the pre-war times, and his company, RobCo, is almost everywhere. While the rest of the Wasteland was trying to remain like the shadows of a past that existed in the pre-war times, RobCo became a name that you couldn't easily forget. I mean, we went through the game and there are quite a few moments where it becomes clear that RobCo was a big deal in pre-war times. So we thought today we'd take a look at RobCo, so join us as we step into everything from Robert House's mad creations to how this industry thrived in the post-war world. Let's get into it. Robert House, the name behind RobCo. You can't begin talking about RobCo without mentioning Robert Edwin House, a name that even the Amazon Fallout series has realized by now carries weight in the Fallout lore. And RobCo could be said to be the garage project of House, one that was supposed to be really promising. The story of House begins on June 25th, 2020, and despite his troubled past, the child proved to be a prodigy quite early on. At the age of 22, House graduated from the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, which is comparable to MIT in our world, with degrees in both engineering and economics. And, knowing him, it's important to realize how valuable this academic qualification was to him, considering the man literally combined the knowledge of both to develop something that would put him one step ahead of nearly everyone in the world. The first step towards his own industry was his project, in which he designed advanced computer architecture and automated systems at a time when the US was building its machine-driven infrastructure. Automation was the primary target at this time, and House knew that it had become more about survival than just mere convenience. This was his first major step, as he had managed to get his work adopted as the government's premier tool, even for its more confidential work. His objective was to make something that doesn't fail, is completely reliable, and can be used in highly important sectors of the nation, including financial markets, military contracts, and government agencies. And this is when he realized he wanted dominance through architecture, ensuring that if his systems were removed, the machine society depended on would completely fail. This was the perfect time to make a solid move, one that would be the perfect label under which he could continue his projects and all of his philosophy, and then came the year 2042. RobCo Industries was founded by Robert House, and it was very much about ensuring that House was not replaceable no matter what happened to the world. RobCo Industries was House's consolidation weapon, launched with massive capital from many of his personal patents and other developments, including hardware and software, all under one roof. The 2040s were the time when the US government was at its most desperate, ready to pounce on anything that promised a solid future, and RobCo did just that. It pitched inevitability. RobCo, not the usual garage story. By the time House developed RobCo, he was already a household name through his early projects, and now he had a label to work on everything from computing to robotics and even automated systems. Naturally, it wasn't long before RobCo became the premier developmental branch of the country, with the company already competent and ready to serve national-scale infrastructure needs. RobCo ended up working on the backbone of American technology and clearly established this position. You could see how dependent the United States was on these resources, with the machine-dependent era as the primary period. Everything from labor shortages and resource strain to international conflict had already proved that technology was no longer a luxury, but a necessity. In fact, RobCo's creations were so ubiquitous across the nation that even in the post-war era, you could find them outlasting the buildings in which they were installed. Even the expansion in robotics was quite clear, with all types of bots, from protectrons to assaultrons, being deployed widely following a period of mass production. What made them special was that each of these robots was designed to function autonomously for longer periods, even after going through some really hostile environments. If you don't believe that, then you can go to the Wasteland and still find some of these robots roaming around, focused on the objectives that RobCo provided them in the pre-war era. And this automation ended up filling the gaps where human labor and other logistics were failing, with the US government becoming RobCo's biggest customer. Every time a conflict arose, the US would depend on RobCo to deliver on every front, from managing data to security to even mechanized responses. This growth was actually more in the wartime infrastructure, as you can see the name on missile silos, research bunkers, and even command facilities. By 2070, RobCo had become more than a technology company. In fact, it was calling itself a technology company because it had become the backbone of the nation. RobCo was embedded in the nation. Acquisitions and hostile takeovers. Just like Nuka-Cola, RobCo Industries is said to have done everything to become the premier company during the pre-war times. But while Nuka-Cola did some hostile takeovers, some of which failed and some of which worked out, there's no clear indication that RobCo Industries managed to hit the mark quite right, as it never really got linked to reports of hostile moves when competing with other corporations. Instead, the reports mostly suggested really clean methods, including integration through supply, selective acquisition, and government-mediated collaboration. One of the very first examples of this is the acquisition of RepCon Aerospace. According to the tour guide from Fallout New Vegas, RepCon's illustrious history began way back in 2054, shortly after the famous Delta 11 rocket was completed and launched. RepCon's initial focus was on developing fuel for orbital propulsion in response to the 2052 energy crisis. Sad times indeed. The company really took off when RobCo purchased RepCon in late 2076 to develop unmanned rockets to explore the solar system. RobCo Industries purchased RepCon in 2075 to assist with some of RobCo's military projects, as well as developing unmanned space exploration. The relationship between RobCo and RepCon is mutually beneficial, and we hope that both companies bolster each other well into the next century. So the mutual understanding becomes quite clear here, and it's also clearly visible if you get into the physical aspect of this corporate structure once you hit the facilities in the Mojave Desert. Here, RobCo is mentioned everywhere, from terminals to operating systems to even some of the major hardware. But the documentation still mentions RepCon, and signs of it can be seen across the facility. So there was clearly no dismantling. Instead, it became something where RobCo only eased the work being done at RepCon through advanced hardware and software. In fact, the Mojave Desert can be seen as a major location that plays a significant role in this acquisition, with RepCon's presence in such an isolated region enabling projects to be carried out with minimal human oversight. No wonder RobCo absolutely thrives in the Mojave locations, even post-war. Another major collaboration is between Vault-Tec and RobCo, as there was no joint venture between them, yet Vault-Tec relied on RobCo's technology. One of the most obvious things that came out of this relationship was the Pip-Boy, where PIP stood for Personal Information Processor. RobCo manufactured the Pip-Boy, which Vault-Tec used in its vaults. The Pip-Boy provided services such as computing, biometric monitoring, mapping, and data management. Meanwhile, inside Vault 78, it really feels like the whole thing was produced by RobCo work, but once again, it was the technology that was being used here where RobCo played a major role. Unlike the other vaults, Vault 79 was where all the gold from the bullion depository at Fort Knox was secretly transferred. RobCo has provided this vault with advanced terminals and automated security systems, thereby proving that the corporation has a major role to play in anything involving the government. Other such collaborations include the joint venture exploring robotics with General Atomics International. General Atomics was one of the premier robotics manufacturers in the world, and it was here that the first robots entered the market. By 2070, as reliance on cutting-edge robots grew, Atomics realized they had to maintain their market share and combine their talents with RobCo in a joint venture. This also allowed Atomics to jump on the government project's bandwagon, and during the war against the Chinese People's Liberation Army in Alaska, the government awarded this venture a contract, known as Military Contract 38917. The goal was to create one of the most powerful combat-ready robots capable of deployment in warfare. According to the statement made by General Constantine Chase at one of the press conferences at the Pentagon, no more secrets. The time has come to lay all our cards on the table so the Chinese can see with their own eyes that we've got the winning hand. The United States Army is proud to announce that for the first time in history, General Atomics International and RobCo have joined forces to create for this great country a superweapon that will leave every single yellow-bellied red shaking in their commie booties. The result of this venture was Liberty Prime, considered to be the very embodiment of American military might, a walking, talking, nuke-tossing hero who will remind the world of what it means to be a superpower. But the project went through some major delays, so much so that it was ultimately decided by the US government to move ahead with this secret weapon, and as the Army went and won the Alaskan front, the development of the weapon continued under the Pentagon. It was only after the war that the Brotherhood came across this project, and they decided to restart it after making the Pentagon their base of operations. Eventually, it would become an important asset to the Brotherhood, but not easily or quickly. RobCo's Icon Factory. Protectrons, SentryBots, Assaultrons, iBots, the lineup. Some of the key creations of RobCo came in the robotics field, with the likes of Protectrons, Assaultrons, SentryBots, iBots, and other Securitrons popping up almost everywhere. Each of them had a predefined task and would carry it out autonomously without requiring continuous supervision. The Protectrons were supposed to be law enforcement and public service robots with a widespread presence across police stations, metro tunnels, and other government buildings. Meanwhile, assaultrons, as the name suggests, were just a bit more combat-focused in their design, equipped with high-energy weapons that are supposed to be used in close-quarters combat and rapid response. At the same time, there are the heavy-duty sentry bots, which became renowned in the pre-war era for their sustained combat and perimeter defense abilities. In fact, it was the sentry bots that convinced RobCo of its major role in warfare. iBots were small, hovering reconnaissance and broadcast units that differed from the others in being non-combat oriented, primarily used for surveillance, communication, and at times propaganda dissemination, something that became quite common in RobCo's work. The Securitrons, on the other hand, are a series of robots that became very much associated with Robert House and his empire, New Vegas. These robots ended up being the very backbone of the New Vegas defense system with centralized control. Remember the propaganda aspect I mentioned a few seconds ago? Well, the Icon factory that RobCo was working on clearly indicated that RobCo's name was everywhere, be it the Alaskan front, where human lives were lost in the most brutal ways possible, or the post-war wasteland where many of their robots are still roaming around, continuing a purpose that might not even make sense anymore. House wanted to be Ozymandias, and in some ways, he did ensure that future for himself. RobCo in the post-war world. When the bombs fell in 2077, the idea of any corporate entity surviving became a long shot because the only thing that could survive were systems that had been operational pre-war. There was no corporate governance that could be put in place, no surviving executive structure, and no functioning supply chain. Often, players come across buildings of RobCo that have somehow managed to remain through the war, and you can see that things that were developed back then are still operational. RobCo survived, like Ozymandias, because their systems and hardware didn't depend on continuous human maintenance. They were supposed to be autonomous and standardized. These systems didn't focus on survival, but on being operational on their own. Now, House did manage to survive through the war, and it was he who orchestrated the development of New Vegas through his Securitron army. Unfortunately for Robert House, it was he, and not RobCo, that became the icon people remembered.